Omega did not plan to spend the night in an empty building that smelled of dust and old wood. She had not planned any of this. 3 weeks ago, she had a bed, a key on a hook by the door, and a name on a lease. Now she had a backpack with 2 changes of clothes, a half-empty bottle of water, and a baby pressing hard against her ribs from the inside. The wind outside was cold, the streets were long and dark, and the last door she had knocked on had been shut in her face without a single word. She was 7 months pregnant and completely alone. Her name was Omega. She was 26 years old. She had grown up in a small town 300 miles away, the daughter of a woman who worked long shifts at a laundry, and a father she had never known well enough to miss. She had come to the city 4 years ago with a small suitcase and a large amount of hope. She had found work as a data entry clerk. She had found an apartment she could just barely afford. She had found a man named Colin who laughed easily and spoke about the future in bright, confident sentences. Colin was gone now. He had left on a Tuesday evening, 6 weeks after she told him she was pregnant. He did not shout. He did not make a dramatic exit. He simply became quieter each day, and then one morning she woke up, and his side of the wardrobe was empty. He had taken his shoes, his laptop, and the small blue rug from the bathroom floor. He had left behind a half-finished jar of peanut butter, and no note. Omega had sat on the edge of the bed for a long time that morning. She had pressed her palms flat against her stomach and breathed slowly. She had told herself it was going to be fine, even though she did not believe it yet. She had told herself that people managed. People always managed. But the weeks that followed were not fine. Without Colin's share of the rent, the numbers did not work. She had gone to her manager at the data entry firm and asked about extra hours. There were none to offer. She had called her mother, who had cried on the phone, and then admitted she could not send money because she was behind on her own bills. She had looked at her bank account each morning and watched the number go down, the way water drains slowly from a bathtub. By the time the final notice arrived from her landlord, she had already known it was coming. She had tried twice to negotiate. She had written a careful letter explaining her situation. Her landlord, a man named Gordon, had been polite but firm. He had a mortgage to pay. He had other tenants who paid on time. He was sorry. She believed him. That was almost the saddest part. The last night in the apartment, Omega packed her bag slowly. She kept only what she could carry comfortably, which was not much. She folded her warmest clothes. She packed her identification documents inside a plastic bag so they would not get wet. She packed 2 small photographs, one of her mother, one of herself at 18, smiling at a graduation ceremony in a borrowed gown. She left the rest behind, the kettle, the stack of paperback books beside the bed, the small plant on the window ledge that she had managed to keep alive for 2 years. She did not know where she was going. She had looked up shelters online using her phone, the battery of which was at 11%. There were 3 within walking distance. She would try all of them. The first shelter told her they were full. The woman at the front desk said it with genuine sorrow in her eyes, and she handed Omega a printed list of other options. The second shelter had a waiting list and asked her to come back in the morning. The third was closed for a maintenance issue, a handwritten sign taped to the glass. By then it was past 11 at night. The temperature had dropped. Omega sat on a low brick wall near a bus stop and ate a cereal bar from her bag. A bus came and went. A man walking a dog nodded at her. A group of young people came out of a restaurant across the street, laughing loudly, and Omega watched them the way a person watches a film set in a world that does not include them. She pulled out her phone and opened the map. She was not sure what she was looking for. She zoomed out slowly, looking at the streets, the parks, the gaps between buildings, and then she started walking. She walked for nearly an hour. Her feet were swollen in the way they had been for the past few weeks. Her lower back ached with a dull, pressing soreness that had become so familiar she barely noticed it anymore. She walked along a wide road that grew quieter the further she went from the center of the city. The shops gave way to garages, then to terraced houses, then to a stretch of scrubland behind a chain-link fence. And then she saw the street. It was a short street, barely 100 meters long, set off from the main road by a narrow turning. The houses on it were old, and set back behind small gardens that had gone completely wild. No lights on in any of them. No cars parked outside. No sound at all except the wind moving through the overgrown hedges. Omega stood at the top of the street for a moment. She looked at the houses. They had the particular stillness of buildings that had not held people for some time. The windows were dark, and in several of them the glass was cracked. One front door was boarded up with a sheet of plywood that had begun to warp. But one door, the third house on the left, was not boarded. It was not even fully closed. It stood slightly ajar, the wood swollen and misaligned in its frame, held almost shut by friction, rather than any lock. Omega walked to it. She stood in front of it for a moment. She put her hand on the rough wood. She thought about all the things a person was supposed to do in this situation, and realized that most of those options had already been closed off one by one, like lights going out in a building at the end of the night. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The smell hit her first. Dust, and something faintly damp, and underneath both of those things the ghost of wood polish from some long ago time when someone had cared for this place. She stood in the hallway and let her eyes adjust. Thin bars of light came through the gaps in the boards over the nearest window, enough to make out the shape of the space. The hallway was narrow and empty. A staircase rose on the right. Straight ahead was a door that led, she guessed, to a kitchen. To the left was a larger room, a sitting room, completely bare. No furniture, no curtains, just walls with the faded outlines of where pictures had once hung. Omega moved through the ground floor carefully. She tested each floorboard before she put her weight on it. The kitchen had no appliances, but the tap, when she turned it experimentally, produced nothing. The pipes were dry. In the sitting room, the floor was solid, and the window, though cracked, was not broken. The wind could not get in. She went to the sitting room and sat down on the floor with her back against the wall. She pulled her knees up as far as her belly would allow. She pulled her coat tighter around herself. The baby moved, a slow roll, like something turning over in sleep. Omega put her hand on her stomach and held it there. "We're all right," she said quietly, to the dark and to the child inside her. "We're all right, I've got us." She did not sleep easily. The floor was hard, and the cold moved through the wood and into her bones. Every sound from outside made her go still. A car passing on the main road. Something that might have been a fox moving through the overgrown garden. The settling of the old building itself. She dozed in short stretches, waking each time with a sharp intake of breath and the immediate, solid memory of where she was. But she was inside. She was out of the wind. No one had turned her away from this door. At some point in the deepest part of the night, she stopped fighting sleep and let it take her. She dreamed of nothing, which was its own kind of mercy. She woke when the light came. It pushed through the gaps in the boarding and lay in pale stripes across the floor. Omega sat up slowly, pressing one hand to the wall to steady herself. Every joint ached. Her neck was stiff from the angle she had been holding it. But she was awake, and she was warm enough, and the baby was moving again in its slow, interior way. She sat in the light for a while. She looked at the room around her. It was less frightening in the daylight, just empty. Just a room in a house that had once held people. She wondered about those people. She wondered what had happened to this street, why every house on it appeared to be abandoned. She did not know the answer, and it did not matter. What mattered was that she was here, and she was thinking, and thinking meant she was not giving up. She pulled her phone from her pocket. The battery was at 4%. She turned on low power mode and opened the map. She found a food bank that opened at 9 in the morning, a 20-minute walk away. She found a library that opened at 10, where she could charge her phone and sit somewhere warm. She memorized both addresses before the screen went dark. Then she stood up, steadied herself, picked up her bag, and walked out of the house into the pale morning. She did not look back, but she noted the door, and the way it swung, and the number on the gate, which was half missing, but still readable as a 7. She filed it away without making a decision about it. Her mind was doing what minds do under pressure, storing everything, committing nothing, keeping all doors open. The food bank was in the ground floor of a community center, run by a group of volunteers, who asked no questions, and handed her a bag with bread, tinned soup, fruit, and a small carton of orange juice. A young woman behind the table smiled at her with the kind of warmth that is uncomplicated and genuine, and Omega felt something crack slightly in her chest at the sight of it. "Are you warm enough?" the woman asked. Her name, according to her badge, was Nina. "I'm fine," Omega said. "Thank you. We have some blankets in the back if you need one. Nobody cares. Please, just take one if you need it." Omega almost said no. The word was right there, shaped by a lifetime of not wanting to seem as if she needed things. But she stopped herself. "Yes, please," she said. "I would really like a blanket." Nina disappeared and came back with a folded fleece blanket in a dark green color. Omega put it in her bag. She thanked Nina again. She walked out of the food bank and stood on the pavement for a moment, holding the bag of food and feeling something she could not quite name. Not hope, not exactly. Something earlier than hope. Something closer to the small, stubborn decision not to disappear. The library was warm. She found a seat near a power socket and plugged in her phone. She ate a bread roll from the bag quietly, in the way that people eat in libraries, as if the sound might disturb something. She watched other people at the tables around her. A man reading a newspaper. Two elderly women, with a pile of large print books between them. A teenage boy, working on something in a notebook, with extreme concentration, the tip of his tongue just visible between his teeth. All of them ordinary. All of them going about the small business of their day. Omega sat among them, and was ordinary too, at least from the outside. She spent the morning in the library. She used one of the public computers to search for housing support organizations. She wrote down phone numbers on the inside back cover of a free pamphlet she found on the community notice board. She searched for her rights as a pregnant woman regarding emergency housing. She read slowly and carefully, committing as much as she could to memory. By the time she walked out at lunchtime, her phone was at 63%. Her bag was slightly lighter from the food she had eaten, and she had a plan. It was not a complete plan. It was more like the outline of a plan, the rough shape of a direction. But it was something. She walked back toward the quiet street on the edge of the city. She pushed open the door of the house with the half-missing 7 on the gate. She went to the sitting room and set down her bag. She was going to have to be smart about this. She was going to have to be patient and determined and very careful. She had a baby coming in 2 months. She had no money, no address, and no one in this city who knew where she was. But she was still thinking. She was still moving. And somewhere in the back of her mind, below the fear and the aching tiredness, something steady was holding. She folded her green blanket into a square and set it on the floor. She sat on it. She took a long breath. Outside, a bird landed somewhere in the overgrown garden and began to call. The sound was clear and bright and completely indifferent to her situation, which was, she thought, exactly right. The world was not against her. The world simply did not know she was here. That was something she was going to have to change. She reached into her bag and took out a bread roll and a tin of peaches from the food bank bag. She had no tin opener, so she set the tin aside for later and ate the roll slowly, chewing each bite properly, the way her mother had always told her to eat. Her mother, who was far away and frightened for her, who had cried on the phone and had no money to send. Her mother, who had once told her, when Omega was 12 and crying about something she could no longer remember, that crying was fine, but it was not the end, that you cried and then you dried your face, and then you worked out what came next. Omega was not crying now. She was eating a bread roll on a folded blanket in an empty room, in a house that did not belong to her, with a baby growing inside her who did not yet know how complicated the world they were being born into was. She finished the roll. She brushed the crumbs from her lap. She worked out what came next. The second morning in the house, Omega woke to a sound. It was low and rhythmic, coming from somewhere outside, and for one blurred moment between sleep and waking, she thought she was back in the apartment, that this had all been a dream. Then the cold floor came back to her, and the weight of the baby, and the green blanket that smelled faintly of someone else's home, and she was fully awake. The sound was rain. Steady, unhurried rain, falling on the roof, and on the overgrown garden, and on the boarded windows. She lay on her back and listened to it for a moment. The roof was holding. The room was dry. She was cold, but not dangerously cold, and the blanket helped. She sat up, pressed her palms to the floor, and pushed herself to standing. It was harder each week, the baby making every shift of position a small negotiation. She steadied herself against the wall and stood still until her vision cleared. She had been getting dizzy in the mornings. She knew this was common in pregnancy. She also knew that being cold and not eating enough made it worse, and she could not afford to let herself get weaker. She ate the last cereal bar from her bag, drank a few sips of water, and checked her phone. It was 7:30. The food bank did not open until 9. She spent the hour and a half doing small things. She explored the rest of the house more carefully than she had on the first night. Upstairs there were 3 rooms, Two that had been bedrooms, judging by the marks on the walls where beds had stood, and one smaller room that had been a bathroom. The bath was an old one with feet. The taps were seized with rust, but the toilet, when she pressed the lever experimentally, flushed with a deep groan and a rush of water. She held very still, then she pressed it again. It flushed again. She stood in the bathroom with her hand on the edge of the sink and felt something close to joy. A working toilet. It seemed like a very small thing. It was not a small thing. She made a mental note to tell no one that she was here. This thought was accompanied by a complicated feeling, a knowledge that what she was doing occupied a legal gray area, that she was in a building that belonged to someone and she had not asked permission, that if someone came she would have to leave. She understood this. She was not here to cause harm or take what was not hers. She was here because the other doors had been shut, and this one had been open, and she had a baby to keep safe. The baby kicked, a solid little movement low on her right side. She pressed her hand there. "I know," she said. "I hear you." She had started talking to the baby more often now. She was not sure when it had begun, exactly. Sometime in the second month, maybe, when the reality of it had fully settled into her. She did not give the baby a name yet. She felt that was something to do when she had somewhere steady to stand, somewhere that felt more like a beginning and less like a temporary pause. She went back downstairs and waited out the rain. When it eased to a drizzle, she put on her coat, pulled up the hood, and walked to the food bank. Nina was there again. She looked pleased to see Omega, in the uncomplicated way that certain people have of being genuinely glad when someone comes back, as if it means the person is still all right. "Back again," Nina said. It was not a question with a negative edge, it was just an observation. "Back again," Omega agreed. She got bread and tinned food, and this time, a small packet of crackers and a jar of peanut butter. Nina also handed her a leaflet, without comment. The leaflet was from an organization called Community Reach. On the front was a simple drawing of two hands. Inside, a list of services: emergency housing referrals, food support, healthcare navigation, legal advice. Omega folded it and put it in her coat pocket. She went to the library. She charged her phone. She read. She used the computer to look up Community Reach and found their opening hours and their phone number. She wrote the number on her wrist with a biro she found in her bag. She did not call yet. She was not ready to explain everything, not ready to be assigned a caseworker or entered into a system or given appointments she might not be able to keep. She needed to feel steadier first. She needed a few more days to understand what she was working with, what she had, what she needed, where the edges were. This was the way she had always thought about difficult things, not in panicked circles but in careful lines, one thing at a time. She was not naturally calm. Inside, she was almost always afraid, but fear and function were not opposites. You could be terrified and still make a list. You could have a shaking hand and still write the number down. She went back to the house each evening. She made what use she could of what she had. She sorted her food and rationed it. She found, on the second day, that the floorboards in the back hallway were loose, and that beneath one of them was a small hollow space where she could keep the food she was not eating yet, out of sight and away from any drafts. She set it up like a small private pantry, lining the hollow with a piece of cardboard she tore from the back of a free property magazine she found on a bench. She found a way to wash. The library had a public toilet, and she kept a small piece of soap and a flannel in her bag. Each morning before anyone arrived, she went into the library bathroom and cleaned herself as thoroughly as she could at the sink. She changed her clothes every other day. She kept everything as orderly as she could, because orderliness, she had found, was a form of dignity. When the outer world falls apart, the way you fold your clothes matters. The way you care for yourself matters, not for anyone else's eyes, but because it tells the part of your brain that monitors your own worth, that you still believe you are worth the trouble. She was still worth the trouble. She reminded herself of this each morning, quietly, in the mirror above the library sink, before anyone else came in. On the fourth day, she found a tin opener in the skip outside one of the other houses on the street. She stood in front of the skip for a moment before taking it, feeling the awkwardness of the situation, then picked it up and washed it in the toilet cistern as best she could. It worked. She opened a tin of soup that evening and drank it cold, because there was no way to heat it, and it tasted, she thought, like one of the better meals she had eaten in recent memory, which said something about both the soup and the days that had preceded it. She was building something. It was not comfortable, and it was not stable, and she knew it could not last forever. But she was building it with her own hands, out of the materials available to her, and there was something in that which helped her sleep. On the 6th night, she slept for 5 hours straight, which was more than she had managed in weeks. She woke once, turned over carefully on the folded blanket, felt the baby move, and went straight back to sleep. On the 7th morning, she woke with a decision already formed in her mind, as if it had been reached while she was sleeping. She was going to call Community Reach. Not because she could not manage alone. She had been managing. Not because she was giving up. She was not giving up. But because the baby was growing. Because in 2 months or less, she would need a bed and a midwife and running water and warmth. Because managing alone in an abandoned house was a short-term solution, and she was not interested in short-term solutions. She was interested in a life, a real one, with Adana. The name had come to her in that half-awake space, just before dawn, sudden and clear, and she had let it land, growing up in a home, and knowing she had a mother who had done whatever it took. Whatever it took. She lay on the blanket a moment longer, her hand on her stomach, the morning light coming through the boards in pale, careful lines. "All right," she said. "We're doing this today." She got up. She washed her face from the water in the bottle she had refilled at the library. She ate crackers and peanut butter. She put on her second cleanest shirt. She put the Community Reach leaflet in her pocket alongside her phone. She walked to the library. She sat down in her usual chair near the power socket. She plugged in her phone. She waited until she had enough signal and enough battery. She pulled up the number. She sat for just a moment longer. Through the library window, she could see a patch of clear blue sky above the rooftops. The kind of sky that does not promise anything, only exists. She found that she did not mind it. It was honest. She pressed call. It rang 3 times. A man answered. His voice was calm and professionally warm. The voice of someone who spent his days talking to people who needed help and had learned to make that feel like a normal and reasonable thing to require. "Community Reach," he said. "This is Marcus. How can I help you today?" Omega took a breath. "My name is Omega," she said. "I'm 7 months pregnant. I have no home, and I need help." There was not a single pause on the other end. Just that steady voice, already engaged, already working. "You're in exactly the right place," Marcus said. "Let's start from the beginning. Tell me where you are." And she did. The voice on the phone did not make her feel small. That was the first thing Omega noticed, and it surprised her more than she had expected. She had called places before, in the weeks between Colin leaving and the eviction, looking for help with the rent arrears or advice about her situation. Those calls had made her feel like a number being entered into a system, a problem being assessed from a distance. She had answered questions and been put on hold, and transferred to other departments, and eventually told to call back or complete a form online. Marcus was not like that. He listened, not in the way that people sometimes listen while clearly waiting to speak, but in the way that felt like he was actually gathering every word she said and placing it somewhere useful in his mind. When she got to the part about the abandoned house, she braced herself for the shift in tone, the note of concern that would become management, the careful professional voice saying something like, "We need to address the safety of that situation." But Marcus just said, "All right. You have been doing what you needed to do. That is not a problem. Let us talk about what comes next." She told him everything in one slow, careful flow. The departure of Colin, the rent, the 3 shelters, the long walk, the house, the week she had made it through. She told him about the food bank and the library and the tin opener in the skip, and she did not spare herself or inflate herself. She just told him the true shape of things. By the time she had finished, the library was beginning to fill up around her. A woman sat down at the next table and opened a laptop. An older man settled into the armchair by the window with a biography, life continuing its steady business all around her, while she sat very still with the phone pressed to her ear. "Okay," Marcus said. "You are doing really well. I want to be honest with you about what we can and cannot do, and then we are going to make a plan." He told her that Community Reach could make an emergency referral for accommodation on her behalf. He told her about a transitional housing program specifically for women in her situation, pregnant or with young children, facing housing insecurity. He said there were currently 2 places in the program, and he wanted to get her assessed for both as quickly as possible. How quickly? she asked. I am going to contact them today. If you can come into our office tomorrow morning, we can start the formal assessment. Depending on availability, we might be looking at a few days to a week. A few days to a week. She could do a few days to a week. She had just done 7 days on a hard floor in a cold building, and come out the other side still thinking, still eating, still washing her face each morning because it mattered. Yes, she said, I can come tomorrow. He gave her the address and the time. He asked if she had transport money. She told him she did not. He told her to let him know when she arrived at the nearest bus stop to his office, and he would come and meet her there. She had not expected that. The offer sat in her chest for a moment, in a way she could not explain, occupying some space that had been empty. Thank you, she said. I will see you tomorrow, Marcus said. Take care tonight. You have got this far. You will make tomorrow. She ended the call and sat very still for a moment. Then she put her phone face down on the table and pressed her hands flat on the surface and breathed. She was still afraid. Fear was still there, circling the edges of everything. But she had made the call. She had spoken the words out loud. She had put her situation into language and handed it to someone whose job was to help, and he had not made her feel ashamed of it. She had not, she realized, fully believed that was possible. She spent the rest of the morning in the library. She looked up the address Marcus had given her and calculated the walking route from the bus stop. She looked up what to expect from a housing assessment, what questions they might ask, what documents she should bring. She checked the state of her documents, which she had been keeping in the plastic bag inside her backpack. Passport, her last pay slip, her old tenancy agreement, the eviction notice, which she had kept because it was official and dated, and she had read something, somewhere, about needing proof of circumstances. She had all of it. She was more prepared than she had realized. At lunchtime she ate crackers and a small tin of sardines she had been saving for a day, when she felt the protein mattered. She sat by the window and watched a pigeon on the ledge outside, working at something it had found, methodical and focused. She felt a kind of solidarity with it. She went back to the house in the late afternoon. She sorted her bag and laid out what she needed for the next day. She charged her phone to full before the library closed and set an alarm for 7 the next morning. She made the bed, that is. She folded the green blanket neatly and set it square, and then lay down on it, the way she always did now, on her left side with one knee bent, a position that her body had learned was the most sustainable. She was too tired to be nervous. That was the mercy of the kind of exhaustion she had been carrying. It was too heavy to leave room for much else. She thought about the woman who had given her the blanket, Nina. She thought about how that small act had mattered, how one person's automatic warmth had kept the door of the world slightly open at a moment when it could have closed. She thought about Marcus, whom she had never met, but whose voice had made her feel, for the first time in weeks, that she was not managing, in spite of the world, but with the possibility of its help. She thought about Adana. She placed her hand on her stomach and felt the slow underwater movements of the baby shifting inside her. Tomorrow, she said, something changes tomorrow. The next morning she woke before the alarm. She dressed carefully, choosing her cleanest clothes, pressing them as flat as she could with her hands. She washed in the library bathroom before it was busy, spending a little longer than usual, doing her hair as neatly as she could. She looked at herself in the mirror. She looked tired. Her eyes were the eyes of someone who had not slept well for a long time, but she looked like herself. She looked like a person who had made it to this morning through her own determination, and who was going to keep going. She arrived at the bus stop Marcus had named 15 minutes early. She sent him a text. His reply came in 2 minutes. On my way. He arrived in a light gray jacket, walking briskly. He was tall, with a close-cut beard, and an expression that was attentive without being intrusive. He extended his hand when he reached her. Omega, he said. It was a statement, not a question. I am Marcus. Good to meet you. How are you doing this morning? I am all right, she said. Nervous. That is completely normal, he said. Let us walk, and I will tell you exactly what to expect. He walked beside her and talked in a clear, organized way about what the assessment would look like and who she would speak to and what they were looking for. He answered the questions she had prepared before she even asked most of them. He mentioned the 2 programs and gave her their names and brief descriptions. One was a hostel-style arrangement with shared facilities. The other was small, self-contained rooms in a converted house. Both were safe. Both were supported. Both were better than where she was. She told him about the abandoned house without planning to. She said it almost sideways, not as a confession but as a fact, part of the landscape of the week. He listened without surprise. "You took care of yourself," he said. "That is what I am hearing." "I had to," she said. "A lot of people in your situation have not managed to," he said. "That matters." She did not know what to do with this exactly, so she nodded and kept walking. The community reach office was on the ground floor of a converted terrace house, with a painted blue door and a small brass nameplate. Inside it was plain but warm, a waiting area with chairs and a low table with leaflets and cups, and a smell of fresh coffee. A woman at the front desk, whose name was Donna, smiled when they came in, and offered Omega a seat and something to drink. Omega took water. She sat in the chair and held the glass with both hands and waited. The assessment took just under 2 hours. She spoke to a woman named Claire who had short red hair and moved through forms and questions with quiet efficiency, asking everything in a tone that was direct but not cold. Omega answered honestly. She did not exaggerate and she did not downplay. She laid everything out the way she had laid out the food in her makeshift larder under the floorboard, in order, by category, without waste. By the end, Claire had a full picture. She excused herself for 15 minutes and came back with Marcus. "Good news," he said, and the phrase landed in the room with a weight that made Omega grip her glass a little tighter. He told her that one of the places in the self-contained program had opened up the day before, a room with its own bathroom, in a supported house with a warden on the ground floor. She could move in within 48 hours, if she agreed. Omega looked at him. She looked at Claire. She looked at the wall behind them, the plain painted wall of an ordinary office, and she was aware of something happening inside her that she could not fully organize into words. "Yes," she said. "I agree." Marcus nodded. He walked her through the next steps, the paperwork, the date, the address, what she would need to bring, what would be provided. There would be a weekly support meeting. There was a local midwifery service they would connect her to. There would be practical help with applying for the benefits she was entitled to, which were more than she had realized. She listened to everything. She asked 2 questions. She remembered the answers. When she came out of the building into the afternoon, Marcus walked with her to the bus stop. 48 hours, he said. 48 hours, she repeated. "You did well in there," he said. "I mean that. Not just today, the whole week." She looked at him. She thought about what to say. "I did not feel like I was doing well," she said. "I mostly felt like I was just continuing." "That is doing well," Marcus said simply, "especially when continuing is hard." The bus came. She got on. She sat in a window seat and held her bag on her lap and watched the city pass outside the glass. She was going back to the empty house for the last 2 nights. She was going to pack her bag the same way she always did, and sleep on the green blanket, and eat crackers, and talk to Adana in the dark. And then in 48 hours, she was going to walk out of that house, with her one bag over her shoulder, and she was not going to look back. Not because she was ashamed of what she had done to survive, but because she was done surviving. She was ready, now, for something more than that. She pressed her palm to her stomach. The baby turned, slow and steady, like someone getting comfortable. 2 more nights, Omega said quietly, low enough that only the window could hear, and then we get a door with a lock. Moving day was a Tuesday. It was also cold, with the kind of pale gray sky that cannot decide whether to rain. Omega stood outside the abandoned house at 9 in the morning, with her bag over one shoulder, and the green blanket rolled under her arm. She had left the place as she had found it, or as close to it as she could manage. She had swept the floor with the piece of cardboard. She had taken everything that was hers. She had even retrieved the tin opener from where she had left it, under the loose floorboard, because it did not belong to her, and she would not take what was not hers. She stood outside for a moment, the way she sometimes stood at the ends of things. She had spent 9 nights in that house. She had not chosen it. She had not wanted to be there, but it had held her when nothing else would, and she was not the kind of person who moved on from things without acknowledging what they had given her. She looked at the door for a moment, then she turned and walked to the bus stop. Marcus met her, as arranged, at the entrance to the supported house. It was a wide Victorian building, on a quiet road, with a black iron railing at the front, and 3 stone steps up to the door. There were window boxes with winter-hardy plants in them, which struck her as a hopeful detail. Someone had cared enough about this place to put flowers outside. He walked her through the entrance, introduced her to a woman named Rose, who managed the house, and had an office near the front door, with the door habitually open. Rose was in her 50s, small and efficient, and she shook Omega's hand with a firmness that felt like a welcome and an assessment at the same time. Omega respected her immediately. Rose showed her the room. It was on the 2nd floor, facing the garden. It was small, a bed, a desk, a narrow wardrobe, a bathroom that was her own and no one else's. The bed had a white duvet. There was a window that let in the gray light and looked down over the garden, which was tidy and had a bench and a bare-branched tree. Omega stood in the middle of the room and did not say anything for a moment. "Take your time," Rose said, from the doorway. Omega set her bag down on the floor. She set the rolled blanket on the bed. She looked at the desk, and the lamp on it, and the small rug between the bed and the window. "It is good," she said. "It is really good." She unpacked her bag slowly. There was not much, but she arranged everything carefully, her clothes in the wardrobe, her documents on the desk, the photographs on the windowsill, one of her mother and one of herself at 18. She put the green blanket on the chair by the desk. She did not know if she would keep it forever. It smelled of the place she had come from, which was also the place that had saved her, and those 2 things were tangled together in a way she had not yet worked out. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked around the room. She thought about calling her mother. She would do that later, when she had the words ready. She thought about Nina at the food bank, who had given her the blanket without question. She thought about Marcus and his steady voice on the phone at the beginning of all of this. She thought about the cold floor of the empty sitting room, and the rain on the roof, and the toilet that had flushed. She lay back on the bed, an actual bed, with a mattress, with a pillow, and looked at the ceiling. The baby moved, a long, stretching movement that she could feel along her entire right side, as if the baby was testing the limits of the space available. Omega put both hands on her stomach. "We made it," she said. "We actually made it." She was not going to pretend it was over. She knew what was still ahead. She knew the baby was coming, and that would bring its own enormous challenge and change. She knew she had no job, and no income, and no furniture, and no history in this city that was not one of loss. She knew that every good thing she had just moved into would require work to keep and build on and expand. But she had gotten here. She had walked across 9 nights to get here, across cold and empty rooms and shut doors and one long dark street where nobody lived. And she had done it without disappearing, without collapsing into the worst possibilities, without losing the part of herself that made plans and washed her face and said thank you when someone offered a blanket. That part of her was still here. It had not gone anywhere. In the afternoon, Rose knocked and came in to go through the house rules, which were simple and reasonable. Omega listened and asked one careful question about the shared kitchen downstairs, which she could use any time. Rose told her the midwifery service would contact her within the week. She left a folder on the desk with useful numbers and a map of the local area. After Rose left, Omega sat at the desk and opened the folder. She went through every page. She read about the benefit system, and the local advice service, and the parenting groups, and the library nearby. She read about the emergency fund that residents could apply to for essential items. She read about a small community shop 2 streets away where donated goods were available. She turned each page and kept going. Outside the window, the gray sky had shifted toward evening. The bare tree in the garden held its branches up in the cold, patient and still. Omega watched it for a while. She thought it was probably quite lovely in summer, that tree, when it had its leaves. She thought maybe she would still be here to see it. She thought that was a thing worth working toward. She reached for her phone and called her mother. The phone rang twice, and then her mother's voice came on, urgent and warm, and slightly breathless, the way it always was, as if she had been holding the phone waiting for this exact call. "Omega, are you all right? Where are you?" "I am all right," Omega said. "I am better than all right. I have a room, Mum, a real room. I am sitting at a desk, and there is a bed behind me, and the toilet works, and I have a door with a lock." There was a pause. Then her mother began to cry, which she had not done on any of the earlier, harder calls. The the ones where Omega had described the shelters and the eviction and the cold. She had kept it together through all of those. It was the good news that broke her. Omega sat at the desk and listened to her mother cry, and felt the baby turn inside her, and looked at the tree in the garden, holding its bare arms up in the last of the winter light. "Tell me everything," her mother said, when she had steadied herself. "Tell me everything from the beginning." So Omega did. She started with the walk. She described the street at the edge of the city, the door that opened, the cold floor, and the choice she had made to stay. She described the food bank, and Nina, and the green blanket. She described the library, and the notebook, and the number on her wrist. She described Marcus, and the assessment, and the room with the window box outside. She told it all plainly, and in order, and as she told it, she heard it become something different than it had felt from the inside. From the inside, it had felt like running, and struggling, and holding on by the thinnest of threads. But told from this side of it, from a room with a bed and a lock on the door, it sounded like something else. It sounded like a story, about a woman who had not given up. "You are so strong," her mother said. "I was just continuing," Omega said, which was what Marcus had said, and she was starting to believe that those two things might be the same. They talked for an hour. By the end of it, the room was dark, and Omega had not turned the light on. She reached over and switched on the lamp, and the light filled the room in a warm and ordinary way, as light does in rooms where people live, and she sat in it for a while after her mother said goodnight. She thought about what the next weeks would look like. The midwife appointment, the benefit applications, the work of rebuilding the basic structure of a life. She thought about what she needed, and what she did not yet have, and what she was going to have to learn. She thought about Adana, coming into this world in less than 2 months, and what kind of world she wanted it to be. She was going to make it the best kind she could manage. She had already proven she could manage more than she had believed. She got up and went to the window, and looked out at the dark garden. The tree was invisible now, just a shape against a slightly lighter sky, but she knew it was there. She pressed her hand to the cold glass, not for any particular reason, just to feel something solid. Then she went to bed. She slept for 7 hours, without waking once. By the end of the first week in the supported house, Omega had learned the rhythms of the place. Breakfast happened between 7 and 9 in the communal kitchen on the ground floor. There were usually 2 or 3 other residents there at any given time, and the atmosphere was quiet and respectful, the kind of quiet that exists between people who understand each other's need for space, without it needing to be explained. She learned names slowly. A woman named Petra who always arrived first and made coffee in enormous quantities. A younger woman named Lily, who had a baby girl of about 3 months in a carrier on her chest, most mornings, and moved through the kitchen, with the efficient tiredness of someone who had learned to function on insufficient sleep. Omega found she liked Lily. There was a kind of forward-moving practicality about her that Omega recognized in herself. They did not share much personal history, but they talked easily about small things, the kitchen rota, which shops nearby were cheapest, which bus routes went where. One morning Lily put her coffee down and looked at Omega across the table and said, "How far along are you?" And they had spent the next half hour talking about pregnancy, and what to expect, and things Lily wished she had known, and it was the most useful conversation Omega had had in months. The midwifery service called on the 4th day. Her name was Karen, and she had a calm and thorough manner that reminded Omega a little of Claire from the Community Reach assessment, the kind of person who works through a checklist, not because they do not care, but because they care enough to make sure nothing is missed. The first appointment was in the community health center a short walk away. Omega went alone, with her documents and her notebook. Karen took her blood pressure and checked the baby's position and heartbeat, and asked detailed questions about her health history and her current circumstances. Omega answered all of them. The heartbeat was strong. Karen let her listen through the Doppler, and the sound filled the small room, rapid and certain, like something drumming at the core of things. Omega sat on the examination table and listened, and kept very still. "All good," Karen said, making a note. "You have been eating?" "As well as I can," Omega said. Karen gave her a list of things to make sure she was getting enough of: iron, folate, protein. She also gave her a referral to a food and nutrition support program for pregnant women, which included weekly food parcels with items specific to pregnancy. Omega took the referral and put it carefully in her notebook. She came back to the house that afternoon feeling something that it took her a while to name. It was a feeling she associated with certain moments in her past, with passing exams she had studied hard for, with finishing a project she had worked on carefully, with the first time she had paid her own rent with money she had earned herself. The feeling of things working the way they are supposed to work, of systems functioning correctly, of being a person who can use the systems, of the world, for once, turning in the right direction. She called Marcus to tell him the midwife appointment had gone well. He was pleased. He had been following up on her benefit application, which had been submitted the week before, and had news that her first payment would come through within 10 days. It would not be a large amount, but it would be real money. Money that was hers. Money that she could plan around. 10 days, she said. 10 days, he confirmed. She hung up and made a list. Not a list of fears or problems or things she could not control. A list of what 10 days of benefits money would buy. Ordered by priority. Food first. Phone credit. A pair of socks she had been needing. A small notebook to replace the one that was almost full. Everything after that was secondary and could wait. She looked at the list for a while. It was short and simple and real. She added it to the back of her notebook and closed it. In the evenings after dinner, she often sat at the desk by the window and worked. She was teaching herself things. She had identified, through the folder Rose had given her and through her own research in the library and online, several short courses that were available locally at no cost. A digital skills course that would update her spreadsheet and data management abilities, a course on financial literacy and benefits navigation, and a health and social care introductory course that she had been reading about with increasing interest. She had not known, before the last weeks, that she was interested in health and social care. She had entered data into spreadsheets at her previous job and done it competently but without engagement, the way you do things that pay the bills but do not open any doors inside you. But something about the last weeks, about being received by Marcus and Claire and Karen with efficiency and care, about watching what practical, informed help could do for a person in the dark, had opened a door she had not known was there. She wrote it down. Not a plan, not yet. Just an observation. Something to hold. Something to think about when the immediate pressure had eased enough to allow it. On the 8th day in the house, something unexpected happened. She had gone to the food bank again. It was habit now, and the supplemental parcel from the nutrition program would not start until the following week. Nina was there, as she almost always was on Thursday mornings. She was serving at the table and talking to an elderly man about a bus pass, while simultaneously making a note on a clipboard, managing two things at once with the ease of long practice. She looked up when Omega came in, and her whole face shifted. "You look different," she said. Omega smiled. "I have a room." Nina set down her clipboard. For a moment, she was completely still. Then she said, "That is the best thing I have heard all week," and the sincerity in it was so total and uncalculated that Omega had to look away briefly. "The blanket helped," Omega said. "More than you probably know." "Good," Nina said. She picked the clipboard back up. Then it was exactly where it was supposed to be. She handed Omega her bag of food and moved on to the next person in the line, and Omega stood to one side for a moment before walking out into the cold morning, thinking about the way certain people move through the world, doing small things that accumulate into something much larger, from the outside looking invisible, but from the inside feeling like the difference between falling and not falling. She walked back to the house. She put the food in the kitchen. She went upstairs and sat at her desk. She opened her notebook to a fresh page. At the top she wrote, "Things I know now that I did not know before." She wrote for nearly an hour. She wrote about how a person can carry more than they believe, and how carrying it alone for too long is not strength but unnecessary waste. She wrote about how asking for help is a skill and not a weakness, and that it requires its own particular kind of courage. She wrote about how the most useful help she had received had been practical and specific, and delivered without pity. She wrote about what it felt like to be received by a person who listened rather than managed. She stopped and looked at what she had written. She thought about Adana. She thought about the person Adana would grow up to be, and what she would learn from watching her mother. She thought about what kind of example she was setting, even now, even before Adana could see. She thought that the example was this: when it is hard, you keep going. You look at what is available and you use it. You accept help when it is offered, and you seek it when it is not. You wash your face every morning, and you make lists, and you learn what the systems are and how to use them. You talk to strangers who might become your lifeline. You hold your self-worth in your hands carefully, and you do not set it down, even when the world is trying to knock it loose. She thought this was not the worst thing to pass on. She closed the notebook. She got up and went to the window. The tree in the garden was still bare, but she thought she could see, if she looked carefully at the very tips of the branches, the first faint swelling that meant something was coming. Not yet, but soon. She put her hand on the glass, feeling the cold through it. Soon, she said, to the tree, or to Adana, or to herself. She was not sure it mattered which. The benefit payment came through on a Monday morning. Omega checked her account on her phone from the bed, a bed that was still, after 2 weeks, a thing of quiet astonishment to her, and sat for a moment looking at the number on the screen. It was not large, but it was real, and it was hers, and it marked the moment when the ground beneath her shifted from temporary to something more like a foundation. She made a small celebration of it. She bought fresh fruit from the market stall 2 streets away, clementines and a bunch of bananas, and she ate 2 clementines slowly at her desk, peeling them with care and setting the curls of skin in a neat pile, just because she could. The digital skills course started the following week. She had enrolled online using the library computer 2 weeks earlier, and now she had confirmation and a start time, Tuesday mornings, 10 until 12, in a community center 15 minutes walk from the house. She put it in the calendar on her phone. She put it in her notebook. She was slightly anxious about it, the way she was slightly anxious about most things that involved other people and new environments. But the anxiety was familiar enough that she knew how to carry it without letting it stop her. She had learned, in recent weeks, the difference between the kind of fear that is warning you of genuine danger and the kind that is simply the edge of something new. The first kind deserved attention. The second kind deserved acknowledgement and then management. Breathe. Take the step. Watch the edge become ground. On the Sunday before the course started, she met Clara. It was not a dramatic meeting. It did not feel like a turning point, not in the moment. Omega had been walking back from the market, a longer walk than she usually took, but she had been restless, the baby heavier this week in a way that made her want to move, and she had taken a detour through a side street she had not been down before. Halfway along it, behind a low brick wall, there was a garden. A small, organized, obviously tended community garden with raised beds and a tool shed, and a notice board with handwritten schedules on it. A woman was working in one of the beds. She was perhaps 60, with gray hair and a practical cut and dirt on her gloves, and she was planting something with the absorbed focus of someone who has done this so many times, they no longer need to think about the technical parts and can just be in the act. She looked up when Omega slowed. "Sorry," Omega said automatically, though she had not done anything wrong. "Do not be sorry," the woman said. "Are you all right? You look like you have been walking a while." "I am fine," Omega said. "I was just looking at the garden. It is good." The woman looked at her steadily, not with pity, which Omega had learned to brace for, just with attention. "Do you want to sit for a minute?" She nodded toward a wooden bench near the shed. "There is no reason to stand." Omega looked at the bench. She thought about the day she had stood on the street outside a house in the dark and made the decision to push the door open, and how that decision had been about not refusing what was available. She had been learning that lesson in different forms since then. She went and sat on the bench. The woman came over after a minute, pulling off her gloves. She sat at the other end of the bench and introduced herself. Her name was Clara. She had been running this community garden for 11 years, along with 4 other regular volunteers, who between them spanned an age range of about 50 years. She said all of this in the direct, informational way that people use when they are filling space comfortably, not demanding a response. Omega told her she lived nearby. She told her she was pregnant. She did not tell her the rest of it, not then, and Clara did not ask. But when Omega stood to leave, Clara said, "Come back sometime if you feel like it. There is always something to do here, and the company is decent." "I might," Omega said. She walked back to the house with the clementines in her bag. She went upstairs and sat at the desk and wrote Clara's name in her notebook, along with the address of the garden, which she had noted from the notice board. She was not sure why. She just had the feeling, which she had learned to trust, that certain people and places deserved to be remembered. The digital skills course turned out to be quieter and more manageable than she had feared. There were 11 people in the class, all of different ages and backgrounds, and the teacher, a man named Owen with an easy classroom manner and the habit of explaining things twice in different ways until they landed, moved at a pace that Omega found she could not only follow but get slightly ahead of. She had underestimated herself. She had been away from formal learning for several years, and she had worried that she would feel slow or out of practice. Instead, she found that the years of work, of organizing data, of learning new software systems on the job, of figuring out what was wrong with a process by working backwards through it, had built something in her that the course was simply naming and formalizing. She came home from the first session and wrote in her notebook, "I know more than I thought I did." This needs to be remembered. That week, the nutrition food parcel arrived for the first time, delivered to the house by a community volunteer. It contained eggs and lentils and leafy greens and fortified cereal, and things specifically chosen for the stage of pregnancy she was in. She stood in the kitchen doorway looking at it for a moment and felt, not for the first time, the strange combination of gratitude and something that was almost a quiet anger, not at the people who were helping her, but at the fact that this kind of help was necessary, that a person who was willing and able could work in a city for years and still end up where she had ended up, through no fault that could be fairly placed on her own shoulders. She did not stay with the anger long. She picked up the box and brought it into the kitchen and made herself the most nutritious dinner she had made in months. Karen came for the second midwife appointment the following week. She checked everything again. The blood pressure was good. The baby's position was good, head down, which Karen noted with professional satisfaction. Weight gain was within normal range. Omega was asked about her emotional health and answered honestly. She was tired and anxious about the birth, and there were days when the scale of what lay ahead was difficult to look at directly. Karen noted this and referred her to a support group for women in the late stages of pregnancy who were navigating difficult circumstances. The group met on Wednesday evenings in the community center. Omega added it to her notebook calendar. She was building something. She could feel it clearly now. Not as hope. Hope was still fragile, still touched with the fear of things going wrong, but as structure. Appointment by appointment, course session by course session. The structure was taking shape. It was not the life she had planned, but it was beginning to feel like a life that was hers, assembled from her own choices, and the help she had learned to accept, and that was something different from what she had expected to feel. The Wednesday group was in a circle of chairs, in a room with bright overhead lights, and a table in the corner with tea things on it. There were 7 women in the group, all in the last trimester, all carrying different stories under their ordinary-looking faces. A facilitator named Helen ran the sessions with a light touch, asking open questions and letting conversation follow where it went, rather than steering it into prescribed channels. Omega did not say much the first week. She listened. She heard women describe fear and loneliness and unexpected resilience, and the very specific exhaustion of being pregnant in difficult circumstances, and she heard, underneath all of those different accounts, a common tone that she recognized as her own. The sound of someone still standing. Not without struggle, but still standing. She went back the following week, and the one after that. She started talking. The evening of the 4th group session, she came home and sat at her desk and looked at the photographs on the windowsill, her mother and herself at 18, and thought about what she wanted Adana to know about this time. She wanted her to know that it had been hard. She did not want to smooth it over or present it as a triumph without acknowledging what it had cost. She wanted Adana to know that there had been a floor in an empty building, and a green blanket, and days when the thing she had eaten was a cereal bar and crackers. She wanted her to know about Nina and Marcus and Karen and Clara and Owen and the women in the Wednesday circle, because the story was not only about Omega's persistence, but about the existence of people who help. She wanted Adana to know that people who help are real and available and worth trusting when you find them. She opened her notebook to a new page. She wrote at the top, "For you." She wrote for a long time. She wrote the whole thing, from the beginning. The apartment and Colin and the notice and the 3 shelters, the walk and the door and the floor, and the morning she decided she was going to call. Marcus and the room. Nina and the blanket, the tree in the garden with its bare arms. She wrote it plainly, in the words that came naturally, not performing it, not shaping it for any audience, except a small girl who did not yet exist outside of her, but who would one day want to know where she had come from, and what her mother had done. When she was finished, she closed the notebook. She held it in both hands for a moment. Then she put it on the shelf above the desk, where she could see it. The evening before the baby came, Omega did not know it was the evening before the baby came. She had gone to bed at 9:30, which was early, even for her. But the exhaustion had been different that day. Not the familiar heavy tiredness, but something sharper and more restless, that made her want horizontal space and quiet. She had thought about the birth, which she had been thinking about with increasing frequency in recent weeks. She had thought about names. She had already decided on Adana, the name that had arrived in the early morning dark of the empty house weeks before. She had written it in her notebook and not told anyone. She was saving it. She had turned off the lamp and listened to the sounds of the house settling, and the street outside, and the distant low sound of the city. She had fallen asleep. She woke at 2 in the morning. The pain was different from anything she had felt before. It was low and pulling and very specific, and she lay in the dark for a moment, doing what she had read about doing, timing it, breathing through it, waiting to be sure. When the next one came, 9 minutes later, she sat up. When the one after that came 7 minutes after the second, she reached for her phone. She called the number Karen had given her. It rang and was answered quickly by a calm night service voice that asked her questions she answered steadily. The voice told her to go to the hospital and told her what to bring, and said they would let the team know she was coming. She dressed in the clothes she had laid out 3 weeks ago for this exact night, because she was the kind of person who laid things out. She picked up the bag she had packed. She put in the notebook last, the one with the letter to Adana at the back. She went downstairs and knocked on Rose's door. Rose opened it within a minute, dressed but with her hair unpinned, which told Omega she had not been fully asleep. "Is it time?" Rose asked. "It is time," Omega said. Rose drove her. She did not say much in the car, and Omega did not need her to. The streets were nearly empty. The city at 3 in the morning had a different texture, quieter, slower, more itself somehow, without the business of the day filling it up. Omega watched it through the passenger window, and breathed through the contractions that came every 6 minutes now, and thought about nothing, except what was in front of her. The hospital was lit and busy in the specific way that hospitals are at all hours, the rhythms of urgency unchanged by the time of day. Rose came as far as the desk and then said, quietly, that she would wait. Omega nodded. She did not say that it was too much to ask, because she understood, after everything, that accepting what was offered was not weakness but something closer to its opposite. The labor was long. Omega had been told it would likely be, being her first, and she had stored this information, and now she held on to it as the hours moved. She was in a room with a midwife named Claire, a different spelling from Community Reach Claire, which she noted internally with the small, irrelevant part of her brain that kept observing things, regardless of circumstances. Claire was competent and warm and present, which was what was needed. She asked Omega what kind of support she wanted, and Omega told her, "Information. Tell me what is happening. Tell me what each thing means. Do not manage me. I want to know." Claire told her everything. As each stage arrived, she named it. As each decision was made, she explained it. Omega moved through it all with the same qualities she had brought to everything in the last weeks: attention, endurance, a determination not to disappear into the experience, but to stay present in it, to know what was happening to her own body. There were moments when it was very hard. She did not fight the hardness. She went through it the way you go through a difficult stretch on a long walk, keeping the pace, keeping the breath, keeping your eyes on the next thing and then the thing after that. And then, at 20 minutes past 7 in the morning, when the light outside the window was the pale watery light of early winter, Adana arrived. She was small and red, and absolutely expressive looking, which made Omega laugh, a genuine surprised laugh that surprised Claire too. She was placed on Omega's chest before anything else, and Omega held her, and looked at her for the first time. This person who had spent 8 months as a companion, and a reason, and a small pair of feet pressing against her ribs. "Hello," Omega said. "I know you." Adana was not quiet in the way babies sometimes are in the first seconds. She was vocal and clear about her opinions, which Omega thought was entirely appropriate given the circumstances of her arrival. She cried, and then she slowed, and then she looked, not at her mother, not yet, her eyes not focusing that way, but somehow upward and inward, with the concentrated expression of someone trying to understand where they are. Omega kept talking to her. It felt natural, an extension of all the months of talking through walls of skin and fluid. She told her the room was warm and the light was good, and that they had both worked very hard, and that it was all right now. The weight of her. Omega had expected something lighter, more abstract. But Adana was solid and specific in her arms. A real person, with a nose and fingers, and a very particular sound. She was not abstract at all. Claire brought things and checked things and noted things on a chart, and the room filled with the careful ordinary business of the first minutes, and through all of it, Omega held Adana, and did not take her eyes off her. Rose was waiting. When Claire went out briefly, Rose came in and stood at the end of the bed, and looked at the baby with an expression that she probably thought was professional, but that was, in fact, very moved. "She is beautiful," Rose said. "She is," Omega said. "How are you?" "I am tired," Omega said. "I am very tired, and I think I am all right." She called her mother from the hospital bed that afternoon. The call was short, because she did not have the energy for long, but she said what mattered. The baby was here. She was well. Her name was Adana, and everything was going to be different now. Her mother cried again, the good kind, and told Omega she would come as soon as she could, and Omega said yes. "Come. I want you to meet her." She sent Marcus a photograph. Just a photograph. No message. He replied in 4 minutes with 2 words. "Congratulations, Omega." She looked at the photograph on her phone for a moment, this small face, this new person, and then she set the phone down and turned back to Adana. She had no balloons. She had no flowers. There was no one in the waiting room wearing her name on a sign. The room held only the equipment, and the pale light, and the professional kindness of the people doing their jobs, and a baby who had not yet begun to understand the world she had been born into. It was enough. It was, she thought, exactly enough. That night, in the hospital room, Omega lay in the adjustable bed with Adana in the small clear cot beside her. She could hear the baby's breathing, tiny and even, and rapid in the way newborn breathing is, reassuring in its steadiness. Every few minutes, she turned her head to look. She was not going to sleep for a long time. She knew this. Not because of fear, but because of the specific alertness that had settled over her. The sense of a chapter ending, and a new one beginning right now, in this room, with this breathing. She thought about the floor of the empty house. She thought about the walk, and the cold, and the door that opened. She thought about all the distances that had been covered to get here, not only the physical ones, the streets, and the bus routes, and the stairs, and the long hospital corridor, but the other kinds. The distance between having no plan, and having a direction. The distance between asking for nothing, and learning to ask for exactly what she needed. The distance between the woman who had sat on a brick wall eating a cereal bar at midnight, and the woman lying in this bed. She had covered those distances. With her own feet, her own voice, her own determination, and the practical, unexpected grace of other people. She looked at Adana's face in the dim room. "I am going to tell you all of it," she said quietly. "When you are old enough, all of it." And Adana breathed, small and steady, into the warm hospital air. The discharge nurse handed Omega a folder of paperwork on a Thursday morning, 3 days after the birth. She signed her name in 4 places, asked 2 questions, and received clear answers. She thanked the nurse, who was a young man named Patrick who had been on shift since midnight and was running on coffee and professional commitment, and she meant it. Rose came to collect them. She arrived with a car seat that Omega had not known she owned, buckled Adana in with the confident efficiency of someone who had done this before, and drove home through the mid-morning streets while Omega sat in the back beside the car seat and watched Adana's face the entire time. The house was warm when they arrived. Someone, Omega suspected Lily, based on the quiet, practical nature of the gesture, had put a vase of flowers on her desk. Yellow chrysanthemums, the affordable kind you find at supermarket checkouts, the kind that last. She set her bag down and looked at them for a long moment. Then she sat in the chair and held Adana. The next weeks moved differently from any she had known. The days broke into segments organized by Adana, feeding and sleeping, and the small alert windows when the baby was neither. When she lay on the mat Omega had borrowed from the house's shared items, and moved her arms in the uncoordinated but purposeful way of someone learning that they have arms. Omega watched all of it. She slept when Adana slept, which was not often enough but was better than nothing. She ate properly, because Karen had made very clear what the nutritional requirements of the early feeding weeks were, and Omega had written them down and intended to meet them. She was tired, in a way she had never been before, but it was a different kind of tired, from the exhaustion of the months before the birth. That had been a tired that pressed down. This one was woven through with something else, the continuous alertness of caring for someone, the specific heightened presence of being a new mother. She could not turn off the attention. She did not want to. Marcus called in the first week to check in. He was pleased to hear her voice, pleased to hear the baby had arrived well. He had been working, in the background, on some of the longer administrative tasks that came with her new situation, the updated benefit applications that took account of Adana, the health visitor referral, the documentation needed for some of the support services she was now entitled to as a mother with a young child. He reported all of this in his direct, organized way, and she listened and took notes. "You have got a lot sorted," he said. "You came into this with more groundwork done than most." "I had time to think," she said. "You did a lot more than think," he said. She did not argue with this. In the fourth week, she went back to the community garden. She had been thinking about Clara since the birth, in the stray moments of middle-of-the-night wakefulness when her mind wandered free of the immediate. She had thought about the garden and the bench and the easy offer of the seat and the name she had written in her notebook. She put Adana in the carrier she had been given through the equipment lending scheme that Rose had connected her to, and she walked the route she had taken before and found the garden. Clara was there, as if she had not moved. This time she was pruning something with a pair of clippers and a look of extreme concentration. She looked up when Omega came through the gate. "You had the baby," she said. "I had the baby," Omega said. Clara put down the clippers and came over and looked at Adana in the carrier with an expression that was straightforwardly pleased. "How old?" "4 weeks." "And you walked here?" "It is 15 minutes." Clara looked at her. "You are not messing about, are you?" "Not really," Omega said. They sat on the bench. Clara made tea in the shed, which had a small electric kettle and a shelf of mismatched mugs, and brought it out in 2 of the mugs. They sat in the thin winter sun, and Omega told Clara some of what had happened: the shelter, the referral, the room, the birth. Not all of it. Enough. Clara listened in the way she had listened the first time, without stepping in, without redirecting, without performing concern. When Omega finished, Clara looked at the garden for a moment. "You know, I started this place because I had a hard year," she said. "Different kind of hard from yours, but hard. I needed somewhere to put my hands to work. And I needed to be around people who were also putting their hands to work, without it needing to mean anything more than that." Omega looked at the raised beds and the shed and the notice board with its schedules. "It worked?" she said. 11 years, Clara said. They drank their tea. A robin landed on a nearby bed and stood regarding them with the extravagant confidence of its species. "Come when you can," Clara said. "There is no pressure to do anything, but there is always something to do if you want it." Omega went back the following week, and the week after that. She came with Adana in the carrier, and she did small tasks in the garden, turning compost, watering seedlings in the shed, planting bulbs in the cold soil that would bloom in months she had not reached yet. She talked to Clara and to the other volunteers who drifted in and out, an older man named Harold who knew the names of every plant and pronounced them correctly, which made Omega quietly determined to learn them too. A woman named B, who had 3 grandchildren, and strong opinions about how to protect the plants. She was building a world, not the world she had imagined at 22, arriving in the city with her small suitcase and her large hope. That world had been vague and borrowed from other people's visions of success. This one was more specific. It had the shape of her actual life in it, the room with the window and the tree, the woman in the food bank who had given her a blanket, the man on the phone who had said you are in exactly the right place, the baby who kicked when she talked, and who was now looking at the world with bright eyes that were beginning to focus. She enrolled in the next module of the digital skills course. She was one of 2 students who the instructor Owen flagged as ready to move on faster than the standard pace. She stayed at the standard pace because there was no hurry, and because she was learning things in the margins of what was being taught, the habits of careful practice and self-correction, and those things could not be rushed. She made an appointment with a career advisor at the local job center. The advisor, a thorough woman named Gil, went through her work history and her current situation, and the certificates she was building toward, and laid out a realistic pathway with a realistic timeline. Omega took notes throughout. She asked specific questions. She left with a printed plan and a follow-up appointment in 3 months. 3 months felt, for the first time in a long time, like a manageable distance. Her mother came at the end of the 6th week. She arrived on a Friday afternoon with 2 large bags and the particular combination of exhaustion and determination of someone who has made a difficult journey because the alternative was unthinkable. Omega met her at the station, and they stood on the platform in the rush of arriving people and held each other, and Omega felt something release in her chest that she had not quite known she was holding. Her mother held Adana for a long time that evening, sitting in the chair by the window while the winter light faded, and Omega made tea in the communal kitchen and brought it up. She looked at her mother's face in the lamplight, the face she had known her whole life, the lines deeper than they used to be, the same eyes, and thought about what it had cost her mother not to be here through all of it, the distance and the worry, and the phone calls she could not make better. "I should have been here," her mother said. "You could not be," Omega said. "It is all right." "It is not," her mother said. "But you managed anyway." "I had help," Omega said. "A lot of it. From people I did not know." Her mother looked at her. "That is not nothing." "No," Omega said. "It really is not." Her mother stayed for 10 days. In that time, she cleaned and cooked and held Adana through the difficult evenings and told Omega to sleep. "Just sleep. I have got her." Omega slept. She slept in solid, grateful stretches and woke feeling, for the first time in months, something close to rested. On the last evening before her mother left, they sat at the desk together and looked at the photographs on the windowsill. The one of Omega's mother, taken years ago. The one of Omega at 18 in the borrowed graduation gown. "Do you want to come back?" her mother asked. "Come home. I know it is not much, but—" "I know," Omega said. "But this is where I am building something. It is here." Her mother looked at her for a long moment, then she nodded. "Show me what you are building then." So Omega showed her. She showed her the notebook and the list and the course certificates and the folder from Marcus and the career plan from Gil. She showed her the garden, though they could not go that evening, by describing it so clearly that her mother could see it. She told her about Rose and Marcus and Karen and Nina and Clara and Owen and Lily and all the people who had become part of the structure of this life she was building. Her mother listened to all of it. "You were never just surviving," her mother said, when she finished. "Were you?" Omega thought about it. "I was at first," she said, "and then I was not. And the difference was understanding that the help was there, if I could find the courage to use it." Her mother took her hand across the table. "That took more than courage," she said. Omega did not disagree. The next morning she put her mother in a taxi and watched it go. Then she went back inside, went upstairs, picked up Adana, who was awake, and regarding the ceiling with the serious, concentrated expression that she had inherited from no one Omega could identify, and was possibly entirely her own. "It is just us again," Omega said. "Are you ready?" Adana moved her arms in a way that could not have been intentional, but looked like it might have been. Omega laughed. She held her daughter, and looked out the window at the tree in the garden, which was beginning, she was certain now, she had been watching, to bud. The first real sign of spring arrived on a morning in early March, when Omega was walking back from the library with Adana in the pram, and noticed the cherry trees along the main road had begun to open. Small, deliberate, unhurried. Not the full bloom yet, but the beginning of it, the way things return when they were never actually gone, only waiting. She stood on the pavement for a moment and looked at them. Behind her, Adana made a sound, a specific, considered sound, not distress and not quite contentment, more like a small commentary on the world, which was a habit she had been developing for several weeks. Omega smiled. She reached back and put her hand on Adana's middle, the reassuring weight of it, and felt the baby's hands close briefly around her fingers. "I know," she said. "They are beautiful." They walked on. Life had reorganized itself around Adana in the way that all lives reorganize around a new person, not erasing what was before but reshaping it, making new channels for things to flow through. The days were structured by the baby's rhythms, which were becoming more predictable now at nearly 4 months. There were better mornings and harder evenings. There were the particular 3 o'clock nights that were their own separate world, lit by the lamp in the corner, just the two of them awake in the quiet of the house while everyone else slept. She had found a way to work within all of it. The digital skills course had expanded into a second module and then a third. Owen had told her, after the second, that her level was significantly above the course entry point and had asked whether she had considered the professional certification pathway, which was longer and more intensive but recognized by employers. She had gone home and researched it and discussed it with Marcus at their monthly meeting, and he had identified a funding route that covered the cost. She had enrolled. She was working on it in the evenings when Adana slept, which was now, usually, between 7 and 11. 3 or 4 evenings a week she sat at the desk in the lamplight with her notebook and her laptop, which she had been able to buy second-hand through the emergency fund that the supported house offered to residents, a careful, slow purchase she had thought about for a month before making. She worked through the course materials the same way she worked through everything, steadily, without hurrying, making sure each thing was understood before she moved to the next. She was also going to the Wednesday evening group, though the pregnancy element of it was behind her now, and she had transitioned to a connected group for new mothers navigating difficult circumstances. The group was different from the pregnancy one, louder, occasionally funnier, more chaotic, and she had found herself, to her own slight surprise, becoming one of the women who spoke most often and with most clarity. She had things to say. She had experience that was, it turned out, directly relevant to what other women in that room were going through. She said it plainly, without drama, and she watched it land. Helen, the facilitator, had said to her one evening after the group, "Have you ever thought about support work? As a career, I mean." Omega had looked at her. "I have been thinking about it," she said. "You are good at this," Helen said. "The way you talk to people in there, it is a skill." She had written this in her notebook that evening, alongside the observation she had made weeks earlier, about how the most useful help she had received had been practical and specific and delivered without pity. She connected them. She looked at the connection. She had made an appointment with Gil for a career update. She had brought the notebook. She had laid everything out and told Gil about Helen's comment and about her own growing conviction, and asked what a pathway into health and social care might look like from where she was standing. Gil had pulled up several frameworks and programs and funding options, and they had gone through them together. It was not going to be fast. The qualification she needed was a 2-year course. She could not start it until Adana was old enough for the funded nursery hours that kicked in at 9 months. That meant starting in the autumn. That meant a timeline that stretched forward a full 2 years before she would be qualified. She was 26 years old. She had 2 years. She had all the time in the world. She signed up for the course in advance, a preliminary registration, holding her place. She put the start date in her notebook calendar. She drew a line under it, quietly, with no ceremony. The garden continued through winter into the tentative beginning of spring. She went every week. Harold had taught her the Latin names of 8 plants, and she could now produce them with reasonable confidence, which delighted him. Clara had given her a section of raised bed to manage herself, a small plot, a few square meters, currently holding the beginnings of what would become, if she paid it the right attention, an extraordinary collection of salad leaves by May. She went on a Tuesday morning, when the light was good and Adana was in the carrier, and she knelt beside the bed and pressed her fingers into the dark soil and felt the particular satisfaction of work that exists in the real world, that you can hold and smell, that responds to your attention with slow, visible results. "She is getting big," Clara said, coming to look. "She is," Omega said. Adana was indeed growing with the steady insistence of all young things, filling out and lengthening and becoming, week by week, more specifically herself. "Are you doing all right?" Clara asked. "Honestly?" Omega sat back on her heels and considered the question properly, as Clara always seemed to want. "Yes," she said. "I am. I am tired, and I have more to do than time to do it, and I am not where I want to be yet. But I know where I am going, and I know how to get there, and I have got people around me who will help. So yes, honestly, I am all right." Clara looked at her with an expression that had no simple name for it. Approval was part of it. Affection was part of it. And something older. Something that recognized the distance a person had traveled. "Good," Clara said. She went back to what she had been doing. The benefit payments continued. She was managing them carefully, the way she managed everything, with attention and a written plan and a clear understanding of what each amount was for. She had been referred by Marcus to a financial capability workshop, which she had completed in 5 sessions, and which had given her a formal framework for what she had been doing intuitively. She budgeted per week and per month. She was putting away a small amount, almost nothing, but not nothing, each month, into a savings account that she did not touch. She had done the calculation. In 14 months, assuming her circumstances held, she would have enough to pay the deposit on a flat. She had not told anyone this, except her notebook. One afternoon in late March, she took a detour on the way home from the library. She was not sure why, exactly. She had walked this route without thinking, and found herself on the familiar main road, and she knew that if she turned at the corner and walked 3 minutes, she would reach it. She turned. The quiet street looked the same in the late afternoon light. The houses were as they had been, boarded up, overgrown, standing in the particular silence of places that have been left. She walked slowly past them, to the one with the half-missing 7 on the gate. She stopped. The door was still ajar. She looked at it for a long moment. Adana, in the pram, was asleep. She thought about the woman who had pushed that door open 9 months ago, cold, exhausted, alone, in the deepest sense of the word, carrying a child, and a decision not to disappear. She could remember the feeling of her hand on the rough wood. She could remember the smell. She could remember lying on the floor and talking to the baby in the dark. She did not go in. There was no reason to go in. What she had needed from that building she had already taken, and what she had given it in return was 9 nights of careful occupancy, and they were even. But she stood outside it for a while. She looked at the door and the gate and the overgrown garden and the dark windows. Then she pushed the pram forward, past the house, past the other houses, to the end of the street and back out onto the main road, where the traffic moved and the people walked and the ordinary machinery of the world turned its ordinary wheels. She did not look back. She walked forward. She had somewhere to be. The day Omega signed the lease on her own flat, she held the pen over the line for just a moment. It was not hesitation. It was the opposite of hesitation. It was the deliberate drawing out of a moment she wanted to remember fully. The weight of the pen, the light in the letting agency office, the slightly formal expression of the man behind the desk who had checked her documents and her references, and her bank statements, and had found everything in order, which it was, because she had spent 3 months making sure it was. She signed. The man handed her 2 sets of keys. One set she put in her coat pocket. The other she turned over in her hand for a moment, before putting it in her bag. 14 months and 3 days since she had moved into the supported house. Exactly as the calculation had said, when she had first done it quietly in her notebook in the months after the birth, she had saved the deposit. She had built the credit reference. She had passed the affordability check. She had found the flat, a 1-bedroom on the 2nd floor of a converted house, 6 streets from the community garden, through a letting agent Marcus had referred her to, one who worked regularly with people in her situation and did not make difficulty where there was none. She walked out of the letting office with the keys in her pocket. Adana was with Lily, who had offered to take her for the afternoon. Omega had not asked. Lily had simply said, with the practicality that defined her, that Omega needed 2 free hands for the first day in a new place, and she would bring Adana around at 5. The flat was on the top floor. She walked up 2 flights of stairs and stood in front of the door. She took out the key. She put it in the lock. She opened the door and stepped inside. It was empty, entirely empty. The walls were white and the carpets were clean, and the kitchen, when she walked into it, had bare counters and a faint smell of the cleaning fluid that had been used before she arrived. The bathroom had a shower and a white tile floor and a window that looked onto a brick wall, which would not have been her first choice, but was absolutely fine. The bedroom had a window that looked onto the street, and the sitting room had a window that looked onto the garden behind the building, a garden she did not own or manage but could see, and seeing was enough. She stood in the sitting room and looked out at the garden. There was a tree in it, a different tree from the one outside the supported house, larger and with a different shape, but a tree. She stood at the window and looked at it. Then she sat down on the floor, because there was no furniture yet, and she sat with her back against the wall and looked at the empty room. She had done this before. She had sat against a wall in an empty room, with nothing but what she carried. That time the floor had been cold and dirty, and the dark had pressed in from every side. This time the floor was clean. The light coming through the window was afternoon light, warm and even. The key to this room was in her pocket, and it was hers. She did not cry. She thought she might, and then she did not, because what she felt was not sadness, or relief, or even joy in the conventional sense. It was something quieter and steadier. It was the particular satisfaction of having done what she had said she would do, of arriving at the place she had aimed for, and finding it real. She called Marcus. He answered on the second ring. She could hear background office noise. He was at his desk. "I am in the flat," she said. A pause. She could hear his smile in it. "Tell me about it," he said. She described the rooms, the light, the tree in the garden. She described the key in her pocket. She described sitting on the floor because there was no furniture yet, and it did not matter. "That is good," Marcus said. "That is really good, Omega." "I know," she said. "I wanted to tell you. I am glad you did." She hung up and called her mother. Her mother cried, predictably, and then laughed at herself for crying, and asked about the color of the walls, and whether the boiler was where it should be. The practical questions that parents ask because they love you, and want to think about the details of your life. Lily arrived at 5 with Adana in the pram, and a housewarming plant balanced on top of the hood, a small, cheerful thing in a terracotta pot. She stood at the door and looked around the empty flat, with the expression of someone appraising what has been accomplished. "You did it," she said. "We did it," Omega said. "Do not minimize your role. You have taken Adana many times." "I counted," Lily said, with a small smile. Omega took the plant and took Adana from the pram and stood in the middle of the sitting room, with her daughter on her hip and the plant in her other hand, and the evening light coming through the window. Adana reached for the plant immediately and tried to eat a leaf, which Omega prevented. Adana objected. Omega handed her a set of keys to play with instead, which worked. "I will help you move the stuff in at the weekend," Lily said. "I have not got much stuff," Omega said. "I know. It will not take long." Lily left after half an hour. Omega fed Adana, who was nearly 10 months old now, and eating solid food with the focused determination of someone who has discovered an excellent new activity. She fed her on the floor of the kitchen, sitting cross-legged with Adana in the seat that strapped onto a regular chair, and Adana ate and made the particular noise she made when she approved of something, and Omega watched her and ate her own dinner from a container she had brought from the house. Bedtime in a place with no furniture was creative. She had brought Adana's travel cot, which folded flat, and she set it up in the bedroom, and put the familiar blanket in it, the one Adana had been sleeping under since the hospital, soft and worn in at the edges. Adana was asleep within 10 minutes of being put down. She usually was, these days. Omega went to the sitting room and sat on the floor again, with her back against the wall. She looked at the tree in the garden, which was dark now, just a shape. She had her coat on because the flat had not been warmed through yet. She did not mind. She opened her notebook. She had brought it, as she always did, in her bag. She turned to the last thing she had written, which was the sign-off on the list of things she needed to do before the lease. Every item had been crossed off, every one. She turned to a new page. She drew a line across the top. She wrote, beneath it, "What comes next?" She wrote for a while. She wrote about the course starting in September, and what she needed to have ready by then. She wrote about the garden and the plot she had been tending, and what she wanted to plant in the spring. She wrote about her mother coming to visit and staying in the sitting room, which would need a sofa by then, which she had already identified in a second-hand furniture shop and was pricing out. She wrote about Adana and what 9 months to 1 year looked like, in terms of development, in terms of what the world opens up into. She wrote until she got to the part that she could not plan in detail yet, the further future, the shape of things in 2 years and 5 and 10. That part she left as a list of directions rather than a map. The qualification, the work, the kind of professional she wanted to become, the specific kind of help she wanted to offer. Women sitting on brick walls in the dark with nothing left, and not yet knowing that there were doors that would open. She closed the notebook. She sat in the quiet of the empty room. She thought about the street of abandoned houses and the door that had opened, and the 9 nights she had spent on the other side of it. She thought about what she had learned there, not only about surviving, but about the kind of person she was. She had learned that she was someone who kept going. She had learned that she was someone who made lists and washed her face and talked to strangers, and accepted help, and did not let the worst circumstances rewrite her sense of what she was worth. She had learned these things by doing them. Tomorrow she would go back to the supported house for her last night there. She would pack her few things. She would say goodbye to Rose, who had been a steady, quiet presence for over a year. The particular kind of good that is hard to name because it does not announce itself. She would take the green blanket from the chair. She would bring her photographs and her notebooks and the plant Lily had given her. She would move into this flat on Saturday. She would build the next part from here. Outside, the tree in the garden was still there in the dark. Patient and specific, a real thing in a real garden. She could not see it clearly, but she knew where it was. She gathered her things, checked on Adana, and lay down on her coat on the sitting room floor. Not because there was nowhere else. She had a bedroom. She had a floor that was warm and clean. She lay down here because she wanted to feel the beginning of this place. To be in it fully, in the first hours of it, before the furniture arrived and the rooms filled up and it became a place she was used to. She wanted to be present for the start of it. She lay on her back and looked at the ceiling. She thought about Adana, growing up in this flat, learning to walk on this floor, watching through this window. She thought about what that would look like. She thought about all the things she was going to be able to give her. Not everything, not without effort, not easily, but the real things. Stability, honesty. The example of a woman who had faced the hardest stretch of her life and had not let it finish her. Who had taken the help that was offered and built something real from it. She thought about what she would say to Adana someday, when she was old enough to understand it. She would say, "There was a door, and I pushed it open, because there was nothing else to do and I was not ready to stop. And behind the door there was cold and fear and a hard floor, and behind that there were people who helped, and behind that there was work and time, and the slow building of something solid, and all of it, the cold and the fear and the people and the work, all of it brought us here." She closed her eyes. The flat was quiet. Outside, somewhere in the garden, something moved in the branches of the tree. Just the wind, or a bird settling, or nothing at all. Omega breathed in and out in the first silence of her own home, and she slept.